With every expansion, Blizzard introduces some sort of new game mechanic that keeps Hearthstone fresh and interesting. Echo, Rush, and Start of the Game cards are some of the newest, and will likely continue to influence the game until the Witchwood rotates out. Introducing a new mechanic is probably one of the harder aspects of game design. The mechanic has to be simple to understand, encourage skill-based gameplay, printed on balanced cards, and fun to play. Blizzard's done a great job introducing mechanics in the past, but they've also fallen short with some other ones. I found some fan-made mechanics over at the r/custom Hearthstone subreddit that I think could help continue to keep Hearthstone interesting. First up is Overgrowth. Pay additional mana to gain an extra effect. So this one is pretty simple, and it's kind of surprising there isn't a card set like this. Looking at the first example, Sprouting Treant, you can see that for 2 mana you can play a 2/2 with Taunt. For an additional 3 mana, you can play a 5 mana 5/5 with Taunt. Where choose one is deciding between two different types of somewhat equal value, Overgrowth cards are deciding to play the cheaper or more expensive cards for their respective values. It's also similar to how Echo cards can be played early once for some value, or later more than once for greater value. Echo definitely encourages playing the card more than once, but with Overgrowth, either version of the card is going to get you the appropriate value. So it's just a matter of what works best for the player at that time. Basically, this type of card is the ultimate tempo card. Let's look at another example from the mechanic creator. Murder of Ravens is a 7-cost spell that transforms all minions into 2/2 ravens. For Overgrowth 2, you can give them Rush. Depending on the state of the game, you may want to choose to Overgrowth or not. Playing against Token Druid, leaving a bunch of 2/2s out on your opponent's board is most likely going to result in a double Savage Roar death. If you have enough 2/2s yourself, then you could choose to spend the extra 2 mana, give all the Ravens Rush, and then trade your board into your opponent's. Against other matchups, you may have a better way to use that additional 2 mana. The concept is a no-brainer. It's easy to understand for new players, but maybe change the name so it's not confused with Overload or Wildgrowth. The gameplay this card provides is super reliant on decision making over multiple turns. Playing the card on curve without Overgrowth might be the play in some situations, and sometimes it could be better just to hold onto the card for later turns when you can get the most value out of it. Some of these card examples are a little cheeky in terms of balancing, and not that they're overpowered compared to other cards in the game, but that the difference between choosing to Overgrowth and not are vastly different in competitiveness. But anytime you make a mechanic, some cards or some of the card options are going to fall through the cracks and never really see play. Overgrowth is a pretty simple concept. In fact, the creator says it's actually from another card game, but I think it could add a lot to Hearthstone as a whole. It would be interesting to give this mechanic to a class, just like Combo, Choose One, and Overload are class exclusive. Maybe Overgrowth could change its name to Beef Up and only have cards printed in Hunter. Either way, I think across the board, Overload would be a simple mechanic that could provide Hearthstone with some interesting cards. Up next is Sacrifice. Destroy a specific friendly minion to gain an effect. So this is basically like the battle cry that destroys a friendly minion, and you get some reward, but it requires a specific minion. In the case of Silverhand Enforcer, destroying a recruit lets you buff your hand, so you can combo this with your hero power for 7 mana to easily get the hand buff. For Druid, you can sacrifice a Treant, Shaman, an Elemental, Hunter, Death Rattle, Warlock, Demon. And that's what I'm getting from Sacrifice, that these cards are meant to synergize with these certain archetypes and make these decks better for a price. I think the given examples here are severely underpowered. If you look at Ravasaur Pterodax, it doesn't have a specific minion requirement, and the reward is 2 adapts, but it doesn't even come close to being playable. Whenever you're destroying a friendly minion, you're losing valuable stats on the board, and the reward given to these cards don't live up to the cost. So I think there are 2 different ways to go forward. First is to just make these cards better. I think you could give normal stats for most of these cards. You could probably bump this one up to a 5/6, and the Sacrifice actually seems pretty easy to fulfill for this one, so you could just keep it the same. Deeproot should sacrifice a Treant and give all friendly minions +2 health and taunt. Maybe you could give Unbound Tornado lifesteal and deal 2 damage to all enemy boards, etc, etc. It's all about balancing the minion's stats, how hard it is to fulfill the sacrifice, and what you lose when you destroy a friendly minion. The other direction I kind of like is actually changing the mechanic itself. Sacrifice could be, if a specific minion dies this turn, gain an effect. This changes the original examples a lot. Now you can't play Silverhand Recruit and destroy it right away to buff your hand, but you can have a Silverhand Recruit out on the board and then next turn trade it in, and then play Enforcer to still get the reward. In this version of the mechanic, the rewards don't have to be very strong. You can still get the value from dealing damage with a specific minion, but now you're rewarded for playing these certain minions and making certain trades in order to get a small advantage with these sacrifice cards. In this version, you get the full value from the cards you played, and sacrifice is just just an additional bonus. Also, opponents might be able to play around some of these sacrifice cards by clearing your board or preventing you from having these specific minions die on your turn. Those are just my ideas on the mechanic and examples given. I really like the concept of synergizing with a specific minion and then gaining a reward for when it dies, whether that be from the card itself or from you trading it in. You'll have to let me know what version of the mechanic you like best. Up next is Countdown. Basically, it's a timer where after a certain number of turns, something happens. Once you play this minion at the start of each of your turns, the countdown will tick down until it does something at 0. Another way you could look at this is it's kind of like a delayed battle cry or a delayed start of your turn card that only goes off once. And so there's a couple different ways to design cards based around this mechanic. First is one-turn countdown cards. If your opponent isn't able to destroy this minion before the next turn, then it gains some effect. Basically, it's like a one-time use at the beginning of your turn minion. Maybe you could print a couple of these, but I don't really think this design is super compelling. Where I think this mechanic becomes much more interesting is with the cards that have a greater than 1 countdown. Priest of the Deceased is a Doomsayer Time Bomb that will go off after 3 turns. It's great for aggro, it's a really smart way to have a threat like this just lingering out on the board, but it is probably broken with Inner Fire, so you know what, we should just retire that card, okay? I think what's interesting about this mechanic is it would probably promote gameplay focused around protecting these countdown minions. These cards would feel like at the beginning of your turn cards on board, in that your opponent is incentivized to get rid of it, but at the same time it gives both players a little bit of time to plan out how to either counter or protect these cards before the timer ticks down. With that said, it's really tough to keep a minion out on the board for 2 or 3 turns, especially one with a blinking timer, so making these cards playable but balanced might be a little bit of a challenge. I think Countdown could be taken in a lot of creative directions. There could be a Countdown minion that destroys the enemy minion adjacent from it after 3 turns. This way, your opponent has the last turn to decide how they want to destroy that countdown minion or position their board to ensure that they lose the least amount of value. This type of card could be fairly statted like a 4-mana 4/5 because the countdown is going to take so long and your opponent has so much control over it that it's really on your opponent to make sure they don't lose a lot of value from it. Countdown could be a special thing on minions that make them more valuable if they survive long enough out on the board. I could also definitely see a theme in explosive minions with this type of mechanic. And last up we have a fan submission from Darig known as Bargain. The wording is maybe a little hard to understand at first, so let's just use Holy Pacifist as an example. Playing this card, it's just a 4-mana 2/8. It doesn't have Divine Shield when you play it. Bargain basically affects the card in 2 steps. Whenever you attack with Holy Pacifist, it's going to give itself Divine Shield. This means that anytime it attacks, it gets Divine Shield. That's pretty powerful. But right after it attacks, it probably has lost its Divine Shield, and it now deducts 3 attack from the minion. So the first time you attack with Holy Pacifist, you're probably going to be able to deal the 2 damage easily with the Divine Shield, but now it's going to have 0 attack, meaning it won't be able to attack and activate its Bargain again. This example is truly a high gain, high loss, and you need a good amount of minion or board buffing for Holy Pacifist to consistently be able to attack with it. That's why the cards may seem kind of crazy with this one, but the Bargain is pretty serious. No pedo? No pedo. Anti-pedophile Bizfuse will summon a random rush minion when he attacks, but when that rush minion attacks, afterward it dies. Acidic Oil can give your weapon Bargain, that doubles its damage, but after it attacks, it takes an additional 2 durability. And then there's Bindo Gear Bomb that makes your Bargain cards have no downside. I think this mechanic has a lot to offer. In terms of teaching new players about this mechanic, you could word it differently, like when you attack, gain X, afterwards apply Y, but however you word this, it doesn't really make sense right away, so I think like a lot of other mechanics, once new players actually play Bargain, it's fairly intuitive. In terms of gameplay, you can go in a lot of directions with this mechanic. The fact that you're guaranteed to gain something powerful right as you attack is really powerful, and it would be interesting to see if some decks, like a Free Shaman, could take advantage of some of the negative Bargain effects. What's also interesting about Bargain cards is that silencing these minions isn't really great value in a lot of situations. Yes, they now lose their special ability, but they still have some decent stats and probably aren't going to be the most powerful cards in your opponent's deck that you need to worry about. I think the best thing about this mechanic is just how diverse you can make these cards. You could print a couple that just Bargain stats around, but there are so many different features and abilities that you could give these cards to make them good when they attack and then bad right afterwards, and overall it would just make for some crazy gameplay. Like I said before, before, I think the best type of these cards that could see competitive play and provide interesting gameplay are the ones with downsides that would actually be able to play into certain decks' special niches. Something simple like a bargain egg that summons a random egg when it attacks, and then destroys a friendly minion directly afterwards could be pretty fun. It's a great mechanic and something I would love to see in Hearthstone. Those are some of the fan-made mechanics I thought could work well in Hearthstone. Let me know which one was your favorite, and if you have any other mechanic ideas in the comments down below. Another episode of the top custom Hearthstone cards of the week will be out next. You can check a playlist here if you missed one of the weeks. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching, and until next time, ta-ta.